Hi, my name's Pierre. I do Mycoregen. Mycoregen is the action or process of regeneration through the use of mycelium. Mycelium is the vegetative stage of a mushroom. The mushroom is the fruiting body as we know it. The definition of inoculation is the introduction of infective material into another organism. In this instance, it's a woody weed or a tree, and our infective material is mycelium. I was born in New Zealand, Gisborne, North Island, East Coast. I grew up on just under an acre in the suburbs, so had 18 neighbours, which kind of says something about the scale of the property. Nice long narrow place with a bunch of fruit trees, so I grew up watching the life cycle of fruit trees and the seasons and pruning, and recognised the importance of having food growing in the landscape from a young age. Then moved over to Australia when I was about 18, 19, and got a job doing organic bush regen, and had some contractors come in on the site to kind of give me the ropes and show me the basics. And then through watching, I witnessed the phenomena of mycelium moving into these trees as they were dying and becoming weaker, and kind of clued on to maybe we could speed this process up by culturing these things and utilising them to actually speed up the decomposition. And just recently I've kind of come back to it and have been culturing my own strains of mycelium that I've found in the landscape now, and having great success with picking mushrooms off ringbarked and inoculated woody weeds. So it's kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as I'm concerned, and my awareness is coming to that we can, as a culture, steer further away from chemicals in the management of woody weeds and actually embrace the natural solution, which is mycelium. And to be precise, I'd say native mycelium is our real go-to, ideally native medicinal or food grade mushrooms, so to speak, so that we can create some kind of commercialization on the phasing out of woody weeds and the restoration of our landscape and waterways. So here's a specimen of camphor laurel that was one of the first plants I addressed on this site. It was ringbarked on the 28th of the 10th, 18, and quite shortly afterwards began showing signs of obvious demise. Yellowing of leaves, reddening of leaves, dropping of leaves, and eventually parts of the branches dying. In that time period, I started to experiment with mushrooms. I stumbled across a white oyster stand growing on a dead Goya semiglauca, and it was pretty obvious that I could grow from the stem butts. So I grew this mycelium out on stem butts from the stem butts that I'd harvested on cardboard and coffee, and sure enough, the mycelium grew fine, so I ended up making up some dowels. And this is one of the specimens that I've inoculated with these dowels. As you can see, we've got an old fruit here that's dried up and hardened, and so this tree has actually fruited mushrooms out of it. So I won't say that this tree died solely because of the mycelium inoculation, but it's definitely provided us with some food in the interim of its passing. So this section here was initially just a grassy paddock, and I've come through and planted different rows here. We've got Vetiver zizinoides, which is a grass I've been working with for erosion control and water purification. It's used globally for these reasons. It's got no weed potential, roots that grow 6 meters down, 1/6 tensile strength of mild steel. So this is our biomass sequester here in the system. It's also going to be providing us with seed stock for future plantings. But the idea is to get this plant growing, this grass growing, and it's going to provide us with some biomass here, which is going to become relatively woody, and then we can prune it and feed it to these adjacent bush food rows, and be using it as a substrate to grow saprophytic mushrooms like King Strophoria and other food producing mushrooms. So adjacent here in this row, we've got a bunch of different plants. We've got some support species. We've got some Davidson plums, Davidsona jerseyana, the local Davidson plum, and we've also got some Acronychia, some eucalyptus, some support species such as brown currajong, And then basically the idea is we've got a successional agroforestry row here, which is based around regenerative native species. You know, we're going more towards the bush regen side of things, but just experimenting with how these plants go together and how much we can squeeze out of the system in as short of a time frame as possible, really. So kind of getting further away from everything now and a bit more into the bush. You can see the remnants of the stem butt where I've harvested it in the past. We've also got a crack occurring here where that ringbark's happened due to the lignin and cellulose being partially digested by the Mycelium strain and losing its structural integrity. So as that tree gets older and weaker, it's going to fall down, and that shock will essentially spur the Mycelium in there to fruit, and we'll be able to pick the fruit off that still, even though it's lying on the ground. Here's a good example of how this dowel has come through and actually started to digest this this lignin of the cellulose of the camphor here. You can see the different layers. We've got non-inoculated here and then inoculated here where we've got that white colouring. So these specimens here I've found I haven't inoculated them with many inoculation points, and I'm finding what you put out is what you get back, so to speak. So the more I inoculate these trees, the more mushrooms I'll get out of it. But you can see the camphor is still alive, even though it can't actually get its sugars back down from the photosynthesis occurring in its leaves. It can't bring them back down to feed them through the roots to the fungi and the other microorganisms down in the soil to exchange as carbon. So that sugar that they're getting from the leaves is actually going to be their main currency, so to speak, for gaining minerals and elements, etc., from the soil. So the management here is going to be to come through and actually remove these regrowth points, either with secateurs or an axe, and that's going to continue to halt and impede the flow of sugar from the top canopy. So if you want to have a look at the top canopy, you'll see it's starting to yellow and fade out. So here's a specimen that's been clearly inoculated underneath this beeswax cap. You can see we've got live mycelium growing in that, that tallow wood's biomass essentially, and the bark perhaps into the heartwood. I'm not sure how deep it's gone in. There's more inoculation points up here and up here. Again, we've got living mycelium, so this is going to be a very interesting specimen to watch develop as the mycelium continues to metabolize the living tree tissues. Why I'm doing this is essentially I've got 2 young kids, and with the impeding changes in the world, atmospheric conditions, you know, natural events and whatnot, I'm seeing a resilience not only for myself but as a community comes from being able to be connected to the land and be able to be self-sufficient as much as possible.